Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you here on this Friday morning. I apologize for being a little bit late in getting started. We had a little bit of an issue getting going. The program that I use generally for my camera decided to stop working literally just as we started. I could no longer get, so I'm using a pretty cheap webcam, so I apologize for the drop in quality there, but we were able to kind of get things going. Looks like those same sound issues that I was having last week, where I can't actually hear if everything is going on, is still back again this week. I had thought that I had fixed that, so if you can hear me, please let me know that, just give me a thumbs up or a comment that if you can hear me, because again, this is a day for things not working the way they're supposed to work today. But I'm glad we're still able to get live. We're still able to do some things today. I was also not able to even use my normal way of producing the image, because as I was uploading it said, oh, this is too large. Evidently using a slideshow with lots of pictures doesn't work, so we're trying something different. We're just going to go ahead and stream straight from Canva's app. So that may make some things a little different, but hey, we're gonna go with things. We're gonna try to figure out how to make them all work as much as we can, whenever we can, because it's not really about all of those things. We're trying to make sure that we can talk about the content of stuff today, and today I am excited about our topic today, as we're going to be talking about why good storytelling matters. A lot of what you'll see on the channel here on This, That, and Theology is talking about storytelling and why good storytelling matters, what makes a good story, how we can continue to talk about our faith and the world around us using stories. And so we're definitely going to try to do that. The question for today, as we're kind of thinking and we're also looking towards next week, is where and how do you get your news? Especially during an election season, there's lots of opportunities to get your news from all sorts of different sources. Where are you getting yours? Are you using a news aggregate? Are you using something like Apple News or something like that? Is that the kind of program that you're using, or are you using something entirely different? There are lots of options out there on how you get your news. So how are you getting yours? What qualifications do you have for a news source? Does it have to be a popular one? Does it need to be something that you have lots of people using? So what are your news sources, and why are you using that particular one? That will be part of our topic for next week. So if you're interested and you're wanting to think ahead on what we're kind of doing next week, that is our topic for next week. We'll talk more about that later. But it's good to have you here on this Friday morning. Again, sometimes things are a little hectic as things are not going particularly the way I planned them. But I am glad that we're able to do this together. We're going to talk about storytelling, but we're also going to talk about how your Bible reading through the week has been going. And so we're going to go ahead and go straight to that. This week, if you're doing the 1 year through the Bible, you started in the Old Testament, you're still in the middle of Joshua, and you've moved beyond not just the story of the conquest of the Holy Land, but now you're also into the area where he's talking about the parsing out. And of course, next week we'll get into one of my favorite parts of the book of Joshua, as we talk about God's fulfillment of his promises. That starts again, just I believe, right there in Joshua 19. In the New Testament, we're in Luke chapter 15 through 19, and we're going to have one of my favorite songs. No, it's not songs. One of my favorite stories from the book of Luke is in today's reading. And the Psalms were on 81 through 87, and in Proverbs, you are in through 13, verse 1 through verse 11. Just realize that I did not actually have all of those up, so those are your readings for this week. If you are in the middle of those, and if you've gotten behind, don't worry. There are lots of things that you can be doing. There's lots of ways you can still be meditating on the Word, even if you're not going through the Bible in one year. Next week, I will probably talk about the app that I use to kind of keep track to where I am. At what point do I need to keep going? Is there something that I've missed? And we'll do all of those next week. We'll talk about the app that I'm using just to keep track, because even there are some weeks when I'm actually not doing all of the Bible readings from the week, but I am reading every day and I'm scattered all over the place. So if you have a tool, let me know in the comments. That's can be really helpful, because we do want all of us to be in God's Word, to spend some time to really be enriched and be changed by what we're reading. This week, as we're looking at our devotionals, again, as I said, we did one of my favorite chapters. Luke 15 is one of my favorite chapters in Luke. It includes one of the most famous stories that Jesus ever told. And if you look at a lot of, as I was talking to someone last night, if you look at a lot of commentators, they'll say the greatest storyteller told one of the greatest stories in the prodigal son, which is found right here in Luke 15. But it's actually a part of three different stories. We have three parables, not just one. The first parable that we have is the shepherd and the lost sheep, and that's in verse 13 through 7, where we see the shepherd who is missing one sheep out of 100 and goes to find them, and then rejoices and invites the entire community to rejoice with him as he's done that. The second parable is the woman and the lost coin, and you see how she has 10 coins and she loses one coin, and so she scours, and then when she finds it, she celebrates, lets everybody know. And then, of course, the final story is that parable of the man with two sons. Right there in the beginning of verse 11, you read that this parable is about a man who had two sons. Now, all of these parables have a theme that kind of goes through all of them. It's not just one story about the prodigal son. It's not one story about the man and the lost sheep. It's not one about the woman. It's about all three of these combined. At the very beginning of this chapter, you see how the Pharisees are frustrated. They're frustrated that Jesus is spending time with sinners. He's spending time with people that he shouldn't be spending time with, according to their thinking. And so when we get to these parables, we realize that these are in a way a response to what Jesus has been doing. He hasn't been meeting with the Pharisees. He hasn't been sitting with the leaders. He's meeting with sinners. And so he's telling these stories in one way so that he can answer that question. And a lot of this is about not just a man with two sons. It's not just about coins. It's not about a sheep. It's about God rejoicing over the restoration of his lost people. In this parable, there are two sons, and both of them don't behave well towards the father. The one, the prodigal son, we often talk about. Prodigal means blessed. In that prodigal story, he's saying basically, I wish you dead, and that the whole details of that story would have been shocking to those people, because he wants to really bring out that this son is behaving in such a terrible, reprehensible way, and yet at the end of it, he's welcomed home. The same thing with the other son. The second son, even though he has been at home and he's safe and he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, at the end of the prodigal story, at the end of that parable, you see that his attitude towards his father, his attitude towards the returned son, is just as bad as the son who departed. Parables are not just stories, and they're not detailed sermonettes. Parables are short, generally short. This is one of the longer ones. But parables are generally short stories that convey often a single meaning. It's not that there's going to be 17 points from the parable of the man who lost his sheep. There's one real good meaning. And in general, in this teaching style and this method, that's how it went. You'd have one meaning that got brought out. And sometimes there might have been more than one, but you look at something like the Good Samaritan, for instance. There's lots of things we could pull out of that, but the Good Samaritan has one meaning. And that's our neighbor, is who is our neighbor? He's answering the question, who is our neighbor? These three parables all respond to the question, why is God spending time with sinners? So what does this parable mean? What do this collection of parables mean? Well, we need to see that God absolutely delights in, rejoices in the restoration of his people. In fact, the second one talks about, when we're talking about the lost coin, he says, so much more does all of heaven rejoice when one soul is restored. And so as we look at these parables, as we're looking at how Jesus is answering the Pharisees who are upset that he's spending time with these lost ones, he's basically saying all of heaven rejoices when one person is restored. How much more should we emulate that attitude and be delighted and restored when one person comes to Christ? And so we need to seek out those who are lost. We need to rejoice in those who are lost and be delighted that they're being restored. That's the point of the parable. That's the point we need to take away from it, is that we need to be active and engaged in reaching out those who are lost. And the reality is that we need to rejoice when people walk away from lifestyles that may have been offensive to us before. This is part of what it means to follow Christ, is to also have his attitude toward us. And he did that by telling the story, which fits right in line with our theme for today, is why good storytelling matters. Now, on this channel, we spend a lot of time talking about stories. There's all sorts of movie reviews, book reviews, video game reviews. All of those are really dealing with storytelling. The question we asked last week, do you go back to theaters when old movies are released? Some of these movies are absolutely fantastic. And they stand in a little bit of a contrast to the way that we kind of see movies being made today. One of the big complaints for many people in the movie industry right now, or at least who are observing the industry, is that we've lost the art of storytelling and we're really just trying to pound messages home. Not that that's not what good stories do. I mean, we just looked at Jesus using a story to tell a message. So stories like, and we've been doing this for forever. Fables. If we look at the Aesop's fables, things like the tortoise and the hare, I remember reading stories from Anansi, which is another collection of fables, or Rudyard Kipling's Just So story. There was a recording we had when I was a kid about how the elephant got its trunk. Fantastic story that goes through. There's a moral, there's a lesson that comes from these things. Most people know the meanings of things like the tortoise and the hare. Not the slow and steady wins the race. How the elephant got his trunk, his curiosity ended up leaving him with a long trunk. These are fables, but there's kind of a message that's being told behind it, and yet we remember the stories. They're memorable. We get excited about them because they're engaging. One of the great films from last century is Citizen Kane by Orson Welles. It's terrific. It's one of those movies that it's not made in a style that many people today necessarily really grab onto. But Citizen Kane is one of those great films, and part of it is that you go through this huge, long story, and at the end of it, you realize that no matter how successful he was, what he was really missing, what he was hoping for, what he was desiring for, was the simplicity of his childhood. That's certainly something that we can take and run with. We can talk about. It takes 2 hours to get to that point, as opposed to a fable, which takes about 10 minutes, if that. But yeah, Schindler's List. What an incredible movie! It's not a pleasant movie in any sense of the word, but it's one of those movies that we've even talked about making sure our kids will see at least at one point, because we should never forget what happened. It reminds us of an event in history. It reminds us of something terrible, so we don't forget it, so we don't repeat it. The Fox and the Hound, one of Disney's classic films. It's not from its golden age or its Renaissance period, but what a great story about friendship between the fox and the hound until they were told they can't be friends anymore. It's one of those little movies that if you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it in a while, you can watch it on Disney Plus. I encourage you to watch it, and watch it with some fresh eyes. What kind of messaging is being given to us through this story. Of course, Phantom of the Opera is one of my absolute favorite musicals. I love the storytelling, and it's deep and it's enriching. I enjoy the story of how it was made. Andrew Lloyd Webber was going to turn it into just basically another swashbuckling comedy until somebody said, you really should read the book. And after reading the book, he was changed by the book, wrote a compelling story where we're really fully engaged in it, and there's a lot that can be pulled from that as we tell those stories. And of course, one of my kids is reading Hamlet for the first time, and so I'm looking forward to sharing the Mel Gibson version of Hamlet that came back out in the early 90s. I think when I think of seeing Shakespeare and reading Shakespeare, I think that watching this film made me love Shakespeare, the drama, the characters, the tragedy that's found in this play. They really did a great job in that film. But of course, if you can see it on stage, it can be even more compelling. And of course, The Godfather is, again, some of these movies that I'm talking about are not necessarily appropriate for everyone. And The Godfather certainly is one of those. It's full of violence. It's got a lot of bad language, as do many of the films that I have referenced in this section here. But The Godfather is probably the great standard for when it comes to crime movies. And I love watching those films, including the third one. I almost feel like you have to watch the third one because you see this whole life of crime and what it eventually costs the people who have engaged in that world. It's one of those movies that on the surface, it's just kind of a crime movie, but as you kind of spend some more time in it, you realize there's quite a lot there. And of course, we can't talk about movies and storytelling without talking about Star Wars, especially the original trilogy. One of the things that prompted the question that started last week and that we are talking about today was the fact that Star Wars is coming back into theaters, which is both exciting and it's more that I'm out. Especially the original trilogy, it's just good storytelling. You connect with Luke, Leia, and Han. Maybe not so much with Chewie, but it's hard to understand. I don't speak Wookiee very well, but these stories are compelling and they engage us, and we care about these grand, epic stories that go beyond just he went here and this happened. In fact, a lot of and we watched a couple of weeks ago, we did an episode on why you need to watch sci-fi. Science fiction often will tell us a story that connects with us, but also gives us a message that we need to remember. Those are all things. And storytelling, the whole point of this is that storytelling really matters. And the medium that we use in storytelling right now is film. That's what a lot of people are using is film. But storytelling is also good in video games. When you see about the incredible success of the Final Fantasy series or God of War or any of these big epic single-player stories, it's not necessarily the gameplay, although people enjoy it. It's compelling stories that grab the attention of the player and really says, that really engages you in what you're doing. You care about the characters that you're engaged in. That's one of the reasons why, particularly Grand Theft Auto 5, and again, this is not an endorsement of the game, but one of the reasons that it's considered one of the great video games of the last 10, 15 years is because the story was so captivating. You cared about the characters you were playing, and that's really one of the marks of a good, especially single-player video game experience, is that there is a story that captivates you, engages you, gets you involved. And what really happens when you do that is you can actually tell something. There's something you can say about the stories. It's not just about the events. It's about the messaging, and it's really about the worldview. As we start all of our movie reviews here at This, That, and Theology, we're trying to connect your worldview and the worldview around you so you're able to understand what is being communicated. And storytelling matters because it tells us about what we value, the characters that we're supposed to say are heroes. What about them should we emulate? It also talks about what we shouldn't value. Why are the villains evil? What characteristics do you see in them that you shouldn't have on your own? Also, just what kinds of things do the characters in the stories that you're reading, and you're watching, and you're playing on a video game, what things are you supposed to feel good about? There's a worldview that is being communicated in all of those things. And that is not the first time that we've seen this, and it's certainly not the only time. Jesus, of course, told stories, and he used those parables to communicate what he was trying to teach. But as we look in Scripture, we also see in the book of Acts. Now, in Acts 17, and you saw the Scripture reference start up there just now. In Acts 17, Paul is in Athens, and he goes up to the Acropolis, and he sees all of these different statues of the gods that were being worshipped in Greek and Roman culture. And there was an empty one. And he was moved by what he saw, because he realized as he was looking at this, he saw that the person they were hoping to worship, the person they didn't know, and this pantheistic culture, this culture that looked for gods everywhere, the God of the universe was wanting to speak to them. And so he used the medium that was in front of him. Take a look with me at Acts 17. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned with the Jews and the devout persons in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Even some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and they brought him to the Areopagus. I just said it just a moment ago. The Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange thing to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and foreigners who lived there, who would spend their time in nothing except telling and hearing something new. Now, we don't necessarily have those same kinds of forums, but here, as we're looking at the story, Paul was first reasoning with the Jews. He was giving something new that they wanted to hear, and then he continues to tell them about the gospel, tell them about the resurrection, to lay out the story of Jesus and its impact. And the result of that was when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear again about this." So Paul went from their midst, and some men joined him and believed him. Among them were Dionysius and Areopagus, and a woman named Nemeris, and others with them. Paul used the medium of entertainment, of what people were engaging in, to tell the story of the gospel. When I was in high school, one of my favorite films was a movie called Armageddon, starring Bruce Willis. And I've always had a thing for Bruce Willis films. I think he's probably one of my favorite action movie stars. And in this film, there's an asteroid that's going to wipe out all of Earth. And the only way that they can solve the problem is to launch miners, oil drillers, up onto the asteroid to drill down into the rock and plant a nuclear bomb that will explode and split it, making the parts into smaller parts that will either burn up or just go all the way around the planet. And of course, there were two films that came out at the same time, but I love this one. And at the very end of the film, there's this moment where Bruce Willis's character sacrifices himself so that his son-in-law and his daughter and the whole world are able to live. This is one of those films where it's pretty easy to look at what is being told here, the storytelling that's being used, and use this as a springboard to talk about Jesus, where God loved us so much that in this way, he sent his son, who died on a cross, who sacrificed himself so that we could live. And you could use a movie like Armageddon, which is, in some ways, now looking back, maybe a little bit silly, but it's a movie that tells a story, and we can use that as the message of self-sacrifice and love for others, even at the cost of our own life. We can use that to spring right into the story that really matters, the story of Jesus and the gospel. So we should not be afraid to use the stories around us, even ones that may not necessarily be 100% appropriate. We don't have to stick just to family-friendly or Christian films. We can use any film anywhere around us. The very early days of the channel, I did a video about Jackie Chan and why I said we need to be like Paul, who was like Jackie Chan. And the point of the whole video was that if you watch a Jackie Chan action movie, you'll see often he uses any and every piece of equipment around him as a weapon. Whatever he can find, he always looks like he's just caught in the wrong place, and he's using whatever he can find around him to make it through that scene. Anything can be used as a weapon. We need to be really willing and ready to use anything we can to communicate the gospel, whether that is a movie, whether that's a video game, whether it's even songs on the videos, because good storytelling matters. Because when a story is engaging, when a movie is something that we get lots of people talking about, when there's a video game that connects well, and we watch those, that gives us a springboard to not only talk about what the film or the story is actually wanting to talk about, what worldviews are being represented, but we can also use that as a wonderful springboard to talk about the greatest story that's ever been told, that we can really use that to share the good news of the gospel with those around us. And so I encourage you, think not just about your favorite movies, which is good, but think about why they're your favorite movies, what things are being communicated, what worldview is being put up as something that is good. Take a moment and think about that, and maybe think about how you might use your favorite movie to share the gospel. Maybe your favorite movie is a Jane Austen film. I know Pride and Prejudice, the one that came out a few years ago, is a favorite from many of you. I love the soundtrack. My wife will tell you that there's a mini series from the BBC that is much better. But the film is pretty good and really gives you all the details. What gospel messages can be found in there? What is the story that Jane Austen was telling in Pride and Prejudice? What is the message she was trying to communicate, and how does that connect to how we live today? It's an exercise, it's a practice, and hopefully you're able to find ways of doing that yourself, because good storytelling makes for excellent mediums in order to tell this good and the greatest story that's ever been told. Well, I do apologize again for being a little late going. I had technology fail, and I thought I had solved all those problems last week. But, that's the thing. Technology will and always will fail. This last week, since I thought I solved the problem, I wasn't looking to solve it. I will, of course, be spending time this week trying to figure all of that out. Probably the three areas of videos that I watched a lot. I watched a lot of videos that were on reactions to TikTok and those kind of things. Probably the one that I spent the most time on was Alan Parr's reaction video to a deconstructionist. You can see that link there on the video. I'll make that a little bit bigger so you can see it. Fascinating, as she said, these are 5 passages that made me lose my faith, and he takes about an hour and breaks down not only what her argument was, but what a biblical response to those arguments could be. And in today's culture, in today's world, where deconstructionism seems to become more and more prevalent, it's a good idea to watch videos like that where you see someone who actually opens up Scripture, says, what does this say? What does the context of this say? How can it be misunderstood? What is it really saying? And Alan Parr is one of those guys I definitely would say that's a good one to follow and keep an eye on. I also got a song stuck in my head, the Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger by Daft Punk. Just got in my head, I couldn't get it out. And so I ended up spending way too much time watching videos and covers of it, including one when the language, unfortunately, is not great, but examining the origins of the sample that they had and how and why all of those things fit together, really geeking out over what makes a song like Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger work. And that's just one of the things that's cool. There's a lot of videos out there. I also watched one on why the soundtrack to Dune works and why the Mario Brothers theme is so engaging and why the water theme from Mario 64 makes us think about water. And those things are fascinating and definitely can take your attention. But that springboarded me also into parodies, and there is a really great parody by Dude Dad and the Holderness Family on the Post Malone song Circles, and he calls it the Target Circles. If you haven't seen it, it's really funny. It's really catchy, and I can actually understand all the words in the parody. Where I listened to the original, I couldn't catch it. Maybe it's just me getting old, or maybe it's just the way it was mixed. But either way, that's what it is. Go ahead and check out the video there. You'll be amused if nothing else. I also saw a movie this week, Baby Driver. This is the first time I've seen it. I saw it with my mom and sister just the other day, and the soundtrack to that film has been my driving soundtrack, and it's just really incredible driving. It's fun, lots of really cool synchronicity with or synchronism rather with the music soundtrack. Great songs on there. I woke up this morning and I heard my cat complaining about not being fed, and the only thing I could think of was the Harlem Shuffle's opening two brass sounds. It was almost exactly the same pitch as our cat was this morning, which was kind of funny. It's very violent, and there's some language in it, so it may not be for everybody, but I did enjoy the film. Next week, as we're talking about, as we're looking at what we're going to talk about next week, the reason I asked about where you get your news sources from is we are going to be talking about media bias. And we're actually going to go through one of my favorite couple of tools to kind of see what you are using to get your news from, and in what way can we make it be confident about what we're seeing, and how do we deal with news stories that we get, especially if they're coming from a source that we know has a particular bias. Well, thanks for spending this time with me this morning. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties and a little bit of a late start. I'm glad you were able to stick with me, and thank you for all of you who are watching on the replay. Really enjoy the fact you're here. If you are watching on the replay and you're blessed by this, go ahead and click the like, hit the subscribe. It just really lets us know that what we're doing here at that, and Theology is great. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic week.